Everybody, we'll get started. My name is Krysti DeZonia. I am from San Diego, California. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for coming at the end of the day on a Friday afternoon. Okay, that was supposed to advance the slide. Oh my gosh. Quick. Okay, what should I try? Does anybody have any ideas for me? Click. Ah. Okay, I didn't push hard enough. I'm really quickly just going to tell you about my background. 30 years ago when I was in my mid-20s and didn't know better, I had two colleagues. We were not happy with what was going on in the field. And so we said, let's just start our own agency. So we went to the bookstore and got a book about how to start a nonprofit. And we started a nonprofit and we got a grant to bring people out of the state institution system and into the local community. And we really wanted to work with folks who had severe behavioral disorders, aggression, self-abuse. Right, so we had to actually open an adult day program because in our area 30 years ago there was not one that would accept that population. So since that time we've grown. We serve about 600 people. We have 12 residential programs. We have an adult program. We have 2 schools, respite care, lots of stuff that we're doing for the population. And one of the things that I like about getting a chance to give talks is that it's really been such a privilege and learning experience to be with this group of people for 30 years. About 60% of them have autism. And so even though it wasn't diagnosed as autism back then, right, childhood schizophrenia is what most of them were diagnosed with, I've been able to see what's really made a difference in their quality of life, right, now that they're in their mid-50s, like I'm in my mid-50s and edging closer to that bad number. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that too at the end of my talk because quality of life is my area of research and my area of focus, and you'll find out why in a minute. I also teach at the University of California, San Diego, the home of Dr. Seuss. But most importantly, this is my son Jared. And so about 4 years after we started the agency, he was my first son. He was born with profound and multiple disabilities. Nonverbal, non-ambulatory, still in a diaper at 27 years old, completely dependent for everything. And it really changed my perspective, right, about the field, about my job, about what was important. So I did a study that lasted 4 years, and I do research on a regular basis. And the goal of my study was to say, okay, your child is 16 to 22 years old, they're in public school. What are you educating them for? What adult life do you want for them? Let's talk about that. I talked to parents, I talked to teachers, talked to school districts. And when I talked to parents, they would look at me, and what do you think they said? I want him to be happy. And I'm like, great, okay, great. What's that look like? And they gave me a blank stare. They couldn't put into words, they couldn't define what a happy life would look like for their child. And I thought, this is a big problem. We have to do something about this. So again, when I get to the quality of life part of my talk, we came up with a couple of things that do seem to be helping parents with our number one fear, which is what's going to happen when I die, right? I mean, let's face it. If you're a parent, that's your number one fear. When it comes to being adult, there's 4 main decisions that, we all have to make. What's our life going to be like in the community? Who are our friends going to be, or what kind of relationships are we going to have? Where are we going to live, and are we going to work, or are we not going to work? So my talk today is focused in those 4 areas. And I'm going to talk about what's going on right now in each of those 4 areas. What does the data tell us, and what's out there for models. And then there's some new models that I think, so this is just sort of me, but I think they're kind of rising to the top, and they have some good promise for us because basically, I don't think that we have enough models out there right now. I don't think that what's out there is going to serve everybody's needs. Not to mention, parents whose kids have autism have changed the face of disabilities. I mean, remember, I've been in this for 30 years. 30 years ago, things happened because somebody from the state came to you as a provider and said, let's make this happen. And now it's parents that are driving what's going on. And parents have a different idea about what they want and what's acceptable in a lot of these areas than historically, we've had. So let's start off with residential. I'm not going to bore you or take a lot of time with a lot of the data, but a lot of people are data folks. So when you look at large developmental centers, all but 9 states continue to have them. They cost a tremendous amount of money, $176,000 a person to keep them in an institutional setting. So it beats me, why we continue to have them when they're so expensive, because it's so much less expensive not to do that. Not to say that, I have met a lot of parents whose whose adult children live in a large institutional setting, and they're very happy with that, and that's great, but it is, kind of a costly enterprise, and not the wave of the future at all. And then you've got these smaller state-funded residential programs. About 95% of them have 6 or fewer people in them. Most are using this kind of congregate care model where you have multiple people and 2 or 3 staff that work with them. And that's kind of your typical group home model, either run by the state or run by private programs. And then you've got this sort of individualized deal where people are out there getting their own homes or living in their own apartments, but not a lot. 26% of people living with intellectual disabilities are living in their own homes. Interestingly, Missouri and Wisconsin have the greatest number of people. Any of you from Missouri or Wisconsin? Why? Do you know why? Why would those 2 states be? I've always wondered that.
Well, I'm from Wisconsin. I think for the adult program, it's the move for funding certainly.
Okay, so the money, if the money followed, which is the only way to do it, right? There's host families going on out there, and we're going to talk just a little bit more about that foster adult care option for people. The thing that I hear the most, because I go all over the country, and I was in Italy and Germany within the last couple of years, and the number one problem is these waiting lists. California is the only state that does not have that. We have something called the Lanterman Act in California. No money, of course, but we do have the Lanterman Act, and that requires that the state has to provide services for adults. So I feel very lucky, actually, to live in Southern California. When I talk to people from, Missouri, whose child is number 3,600 on a waiting list and is going to be 80 years old before their name comes up to the top of the list. So that's kind of scary, and one of the reasons that I wanted to focus on residential models. So here's the options available right now in residential. And I'm going to talk about the ones in red, because the ones in red are the ones that I think people tend to know a little less about and that I think might have some promise, right, for the future as emerging new models. So the first one is called intentional communities. And an intentional community usually starts with some sort of a philosophy. And usually that philosophy is that people without disabilities can have a much richer and better quality of life by spending some of their time around people with disabilities. So it's, it's a different way of thinking about things. It's not people that are hired to come in and work with folks, with autism or intellectual disabilities. They're there because they believe that something in their life can change or be better. So one of the places that I want you to check out, if you've never heard of it, is a place called, is a place called L'Arche, and I don't speak French, so I apologize if I'm wrecking that up. But if you've never heard of it, it's L'Arche. It does have a religious foundation, but it is not a religious, it's not a requirement or an extremely religiously based day-to-day life within large communities. Everything's integrated in these intentional communities, and they have them more in Europe and Canada than in the U.S., although they do have them scattered across the U.S. And it's something, if you're a parent or if you're in the field, I don't really have the depth of knowledge about it. I've never worked in one or visited one, but I definitely think it's worth a little bit of your time to go out onto the internet and check these out a little bit more. What I was impressed with was that philosophical underpinning that they have there, that everybody with a disability, regardless of how severe it is, can make a contribution. And so your goal is to figure out what's the contribution that this guy can make. And don't forget, this talk is focused here, my talk, is focused on people with very severe autism, right? People who are not going to be able to direct their own future, may not have the language to even really reliably tell you whether they like something or not. It's how many parents do we have? Okay, a lot. We have to deal with this, right? Even with my son, I'm going to be the person that's deciding what his future looks like. So these are communities where the ethics of the community seem to be a good fit. The other one that I've been talking to people about as I travel around is this idea of co-ops. And basically a co-op is where a nonprofit organization usually buys like an apartment complex with however many apartments in it. And they set up rules. And if you want to live in this co-op, you have to follow the rules of the co-op. So what this you start by deciding, well, how many people with autism are going to live? Say there's 30 apartments. Well, we're going to say not more than 10 of these apartments will have people with autism, and the other 20 apartments will be people from the general community that are agreeing to follow the rules of the co-op in terms of living there. And there's advantages to living in a co-op. And there's two ways to do it. You can buy a share in the co-op, which means I own a share here, and so I have a right as a share owner to live in any one of these apartments within the co-op, right? Or you can do a membership fee, and that membership fee basically entitles you to the same thing. The good thing about it is it's not an asset. So your child's, money that you might have in a trust or money that you might have somewhere else, because it's not an asset, it's not going to impact their ability to qualify for state funds. So there's an organization called Neighbors Allied for Better Opportunities in Residential Support that has done a model like this for people with significant intellectual disability. And so they started with their goals, and here they were. They wanted to have community, not just a bunch of people that live there and you don't really know your neighbor, but where everybody who lives there is agreeing to be involved in the lives of the other people that live there. Not something everybody would like, okay, but certainly something that if you have people with severe autism living within the apartment complex, the idea that there'd be multiple people who know about that person, who've agreed to play a role in that person's life in order to live in this co-op and have reduced rents and the other advantages of a co-op. Full participation for everyone. Relationships were the central key. And when I talk later about quality of life, and I told you, I've worked for 30 years with the folks that I work with, the number one thing that's made a difference in their quality of life now that they're in their 50s, and I met them in their 20s, has been, is there anybody in their life who isn't paid to be there? Bottom line. So if you want to know where to focus your attention, that's where you need to focus your attention. And we'll talk a little bit more about ways to do that because it's hard to do. To live there, you become a member, you agree to support people with disabilities. And what this organization did was they actually hired a position called a community organizer. So they charged more, rent to the people that lived in the co-op, and they hired a person who bridges the neighbors with the people with disabilities that live there. So they make sure you know about them, they make sure you know your needs, they make sure that you understand what that means to be agreeing to support those folks. And it's been a very successful model for them. So check this out. When you get time, go on the internet and see what you think about that. We had a really interesting experience. So like I told you, when we started with our 12 residences, we only started with 4, and it was all about the state. The state had contacted us. Oh, we have people that, we want to put in a home. Will you open a home? Well, how much money you got? Okay, we'll open a home. Well, at this point, it's probably been about 6 years ago, we had 3 parents approach us. They all had sons with autism who were between 19, 20, 21, and they're just out of school sort of age range. Very severely autistic and also very severe behavioral disorders. And they said, we don't like any of the residential options out there. We want you to open a home for our kids with autism, right? And I'll tell you what they wanted because I think you'll appreciate it. So we said, well, let's talk, okay? So we did what we call life quality planning, which again I'll tell you a little bit more in detail about in the end. And we kind of got a sense of what's the deal here. What do these parents want down the road? What do they want right now? We talked about options, and we designed the model together. And we'd never done this before. I mean, it doesn't sound like it's that big of a deal, but honestly, as a 30-year residential provider, it's the first time we ever sat with parents and said, let's talk about what this residence is going to look like. And I don't think that most parents would do that with an agency. I mean, I don't know. In my neck of the woods, it just had never happened before. So here's what they wanted. And there's probably 3 screens that are going to come up, but they wanted a big house. They wanted 4 of the kids, and they all happened to be boys, to have their own rooms. 2 of them had been friends, and they thought they'd be all right living together. One of the men has a severe elopement problem, has been found on the freeway running away, so kind of a life-threatening elopement problem. So he really needed to be not near a busy road. We're in Southern California, so it's about pools and jacuzzis and barbecues and outdoor space. They wanted plenty of places for the kids to escape to when they didn't want to be around each other. And they wanted everything top quality. They don't want any used furniture. We want everything to be beautiful and nice. This is the staffing pattern that they wanted. They wanted to have a live-in model, so there's kind of like a house parent who lives there, works there 5 days a week. They wanted a 1-to-2 ratio, so there could be a lot of more individualized activities that went on in the house. Only experienced staff, no inexperienced staff. They didn't want anybody that didn't know what they were doing. And they wanted the salaries to be on the higher end. Now 14 to 18, you know, you're not going to buy even a garage in Southern California. But for the typical rates of pay, that's a good rate of pay for a direct support staff. And then we always have offered medical, dental, and paid time off. And parents said, we'll support your weekend relief at least for now. So we'll take kids home a couple weekends a month, right, so that you don't have to staff the house. And these are all the things they wanted them to be able to do. So I won't read everything, but lots of time in the community. They wanted animals. We do have a therapeutic equestrian program, so they wanted their boys involved in that. We do have a personal fitness trainer, so they actually started a karate group with these guys. And, you know, I know this is all sounding very, you know, very Southern California, huh? But it's what was important to them. They wanted to cook and garden and take vacations in Big Bear, and, you know, and why not? I mean, it's the quality of life that all of us would like to have if we weren't, you know, working 80 hours a week. Friendship development and maintenance. So here's just a little bit of the budget. Here's how this worked out, because this is expensive. The home that they wanted had to be modified, right? The home we found. Inside, I live in a 1,600 square foot home built in the 1970s. You know, shake roof, old tree roots, you know, stuff like that. And my house is $550,000. So that's the deal with homes where I live. And so that if you look at this and you think, oh my God, this is ridiculous, that's what you're looking at. We had to have a 4,000 square foot house to fit these kids. It was almost $1 million to buy the house. So we got a HUD grant for $550,000. We got a community development block grant for $250,000. That comes from the city. The city has to have a certain number of homes that are for lower income people or people with disabilities. We have a regional center system there, so they kicked in a little bit of funding. That's who provides the case management and social workers for people with disabilities. And then the parents themselves each contributed for a total of $150,000. So this wasn't an option for parents who are low income, unfortunately. But these parents were like, well, I sent my other kid to college. It cost me $30,000 to send them to college, you know. So they that was their logic. And then they also chose, because of the vacations and all these other things that they wanted, to pay $1,500 a month of sustaining funds. That wasn't necessary, but it was necessary in order to have the laundry list of things that they wanted to have. The good thing about that model has been that, and the best thing about that model, I think, is that they sort of knew each other, but their kids didn't know each other, right? And what ended up happening in this house is this tremendous circle of support. So a family would go to visit their son, and they'd look over at another guy that lived there, and they'd call up that parent. They'd go, you know, I was over at the house the other night. You know, he didn't look too happy to me, or they gave him a really funky haircut, or, you know, whatever. And then the brothers and sisters come to visit, and they start getting to know each other. And it's kind of naturally formed this big circle of support that I think will persist, right, beyond the time that the parents get too old to be involved. You know, so it's a good model, but only for people who have the financial resources to do it. But don't eliminate it if you can get your hands on something like that, approaching an agency in your area and see if they'll work with you, because for these families it worked out really well with us. Adult foster care is another model that's out there where they simply find a home and they give them some support and training, and adults with significant disabilities can go live with an alternate family. So that might be something that some of you want to take a look into. This was a parent that came up to me only about a month ago, and I have no idea if this will work, but I absolutely love it, so I thought I'd throw it out to you, and maybe wherever you live, it might be something that you want to think about. But they want to find one other family who has a child that's compatible with his son. His son is 20 years old and has very severe autism and some pretty significant behaviors. And the dad said to me, you know, I don't want my son to live in a residence all the time. If he doesn't come home for the weekends, I know I'll never see him. That's just my life. It's a little odd for a father to say, but that's the deal with him. And he said, I want him to live at home with me till I die, or until I can no longer manage him. But I don't want 7-day-a-week full-time residential care. And right now, in our area at least, that's really the only option. If you place, you place, because the agency gets money for a full bed. And so they can't financially stay afloat if the place isn't full basically 7 times a week, right? And so what he wants to do is buy a 3-bedroom apartment, have his son live in 1 bedroom Monday through Thursday, and then have the second person, you know, also live part-time in their bedroom. and then have a live-in staffing model. And this could go on, but their son's 20. These families are pretty young. I'd say they're mid-40s. This could go on for 40 years, that their son lives part-time in this kind of a situation. I happen to think, I mean, my son, like I said earlier, is 27. I'm so not ready to place my son yet. I'm sorry, I'm not. Despite the number of people that say you really need to start, and I've run residential programs for 30 years, which may be one of the reasons why I'm not quite ready to place my son. But you know, not that they're bad. Our group homes are models for the state of California. Okay, so we're very proud of that. We have excellent group homes, but when it comes to your kid, it is a huge decision to make placement. And I think a lot of families, if they knew that they could do sort of stick your toe or half of your foot in the water, have your son or daughter live there 3-4 days a week, see how that goes for a few years, kick the tires, maybe add another day of the week. I think that idea of a gradual residential model, I think it would have a lot of appeal. I see some nodders. Do you guys agree with this? If I find a way to work this out, I'll definitely put it on the LinkedIn thing. I had a guy that was an attorney who said, well, there's some legal stuff, that you'd have to worry about with this, but I don't think it's insurmountable personally. So it's just a model I wanted to throw out there. If any of you ever find out or run into anybody that's doing this sort of part-time residential placement model successfully, please let me know, because I talk to hundreds and hundreds of families and I would love to share that model. I really like it. One thing, in case you don't know it, and a lot of you look like you might, but one of the problems with placing someone in a home that's licensed is that if something happens that changes their medical status, they won't be able to stay. So, you may have so we've seen this, right? In 30 years, we've had adults who've lived with us for the whole 30 years, and they have a stroke. And now they need to use a walker. And our houses aren't licensed for people in walkers. They can't live there anymore. So it has nothing to do with our desire. We actually built another residence, right, for our adults that are getting older, because they're our family at this point, and we don't want to see them have to leave. But it's the downside to not having a residence that you own, your child owns, a trust owns, something like that, is this idea that they could have to leave it when they've been in it for a really long time. So sort of factor that in when you're thinking about residential placement, and ask those questions as you go around. There isn't a right way to do residential. I've watched this pendulum swing back and forth since the 1980s, and and it's all about individualized now. And okay, that's great. But I worked with these two twins named Terry and Jerry, and Terry and Jerry were very capable people. And the big push is on individualized. Is on a job of your own and a house of your own, right? And they did this for her. Okay, now when I worked with her, it was at the Ark. And it was like a sheltered workshop. And these guys would all, bring their lunch boxes, and at lunchtime they'd gossip like it felt like middle school, and they'd go out to the movies together, and they'd have little boyfriends and girlfriends, and all that stuff went on. But when she got her own apartment and her own job, she wiped down tables at some restaurant or something. I ran into her, and I'm like, well, how's it going? How's it going, Terry? And she goes, well, I have my own apartment, and I have a job over at whatever this restaurant is, and I wipe down the tables. Well, how do you like it? She said, I'm miserable, okay? I don't have any friends. I don't have anybody to eat lunch with anymore. I don't have anybody around me. So we do need to think twice. Yes, there's a lot of dignity in having a respected job and in having a home of your own, but not if it makes you lonely. I'm sorry. So nobody may like sheltered workshops, but for Terry, she thrived there because she had a lot of peers there that kind of kept her life happy. So I don't think there's any one right way. Don't get stuck on this idea that, oh, no, these are no good. 6 beds are terrible and everything has to be this. I don't think that's true. I think it depends on the person. That's my little message. We are looking at if you think you might want to get together and try to open your own residence or approach an agency, we'll do a webinar if we get enough folks interested in it. So this is, you just send us a little thing, I'd like a webinar, and if we get 15 or 20 people, we'll do one that really explains that model a little bit more, step by step. How do we go about opening up this home and getting all those things that the families wanted us to have?
Can you go back a second?
Sure. So now we're going to move on to employment. The news about employment is not so great. There's not a lot of money being made, not a lot of full-time work going on, and not a lot of quality of life relationship building going on with people who are employed in the general community. And I had a lady come up to me and accuse me of being really negative, and I kept saying, I didn't make this up. You know, this is data. This is research-based data. It's the reality of what's going on out there. And it's not meant to be discouraging. But the money that's being, look at that. Less than half of people with a disability earn less than $1,000 a month, and the other half less than $500 a month, right? When only 20% of the general population earns less than $1,000 a month. Now, part of that is nobody wants to mess with their benefits, right? If you earn too much money, you'll lose your benefits, which is a crazy system that we have. But being below the poverty level is not all right. And the fact that what people are doing is, you know, the 5 F's, right? The food, the filth, the filing, the fetching, and the flowers. And that's all right if you like to do those things. But I think there need to be more options in terms of jobs. If you look up at the jobs that people with more significant intellectual disabilities are filling, that's what they're doing. They're cleaning up parks, or they're wiping off tables, or they're doing jobs that may or may not be gratifying because it's the only kind of work that they're able to really find out there. In terms of the social pieces of being employed, what the research data is telling us is that most of the contact that they're getting with their coworkers is about jobs. Go put that over there on that shelf. You know, come over here and bring this thing to me. And they're not getting any contact, you know, right at lunchtime, on break time, outside of the workplace, which if you look at your job, isn't that, you know, it's a large part of why you like your job is the people that you work with, right, and the time that you spend with those people. When you've got a job coach, most of the interactions going on between the job coach and the employees at the place, not between the person with autism. The social skill thing is obviously, you know, the big deal. And if you look at the job place, there's a lot of most of the workday is social skills. I don't know about your jobs, but at mine it is. The little jokes and the teasing and the, hey, how'd your daughter's wedding go? And, that kind of stuff is just so much of a job. And we're not teaching that to people with autism. So they get on the job and they might do a great job of the work, but they're not finding that place of acceptance within the workplace. That's what we're learning from the research. And here are your options for employment, right, that are out there right now, all the way from just go out and find a job somewhere, all the way on down the line. But the thing that I really want to focus on is Microenterprise. And I'm sure that a lot of you have heard of it, but there are a couple of models that I wanted to share, because I think Microenterprise has been used a lot with people who have more capabilities, but I'm looking again at folks who have very severe autism. And I'll share with you in a second a model that we did for that population, and I'll tell you how that's going. So pretty much Microenterprise, if you don't know, is you start your own business, which sounds a little bit overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be a big business. It can be a very small business. And there is money available through rehab to help you do this kind of thing. And that's called the PASS program through Social Security, PASS. And they will give you money to buy tools and start your business or do whatever it is that you want to do if you have a disability. There are all kinds of businesses going on out there that people with significant disabilities are running. And here's a list. You know, pet gift baskets and gourmet dog biscuit making, and people have gotten very, very creative and based it on the interests of the folks with autism. So if they're all about trains, they make a line of cards with trains on them, and they're finding outlets to sell them. Realistically, it's the parents that are getting this thing launched. But once it gets launched, it seems to be able to take on a life of its own, and parents don't have to look at a lifetime of trying to run a business. So there's two stories to share if you haven't heard them. The first is a man named Kevin, who has very significant intellectual disabilities and very severe aggression, lots of property destruction and violence towards other people. So it was a challenge to get Kevin to do anything, but he loved to take things apart, right? He was a give me a machine and I'll take it apart kind of guy. And so they went out with him, his support people went out, and they found this garage that needed some place to disassemble and clean parts of engines and then put them back together. And I guess Kevin was also pretty good at putting them back together. So they used the Voc Rehab support and some additional money through their local developmental disabilities agency and that PASS money that I told you about through Social Security. And they bought him like workbenches and tools to take things apart, and they kind of got him like the tools of his trade, right? And then he rented a little space in the very back in an isolated area of this garage where he basically didn't run into a lot of people. But for Kevin, that was all right. In their book, I guess they weren't looking at social as much as they were something that really engaged his time and that could bring him enough income to not have to worry about all these funding cuts that are going on out there. And so Kevin's been at it for 7 years. He works 20 to 30 hours a week, and he charges $30 an hour for his services. Not bad, right? But my favorite one is Poppin Joe's Kettle. How many of you guys have heard of it? Just a few of you. I just love this story. This is a man with Down syndrome as well as autism. So this guy, he really isn't verbal. He really is very significantly impaired because of his disabilities. And his dad was just determined. His dad looked up at the adult options when Joe became an adult and said, this is unacceptable to me. I can do better than this. So his dad's this kind of feisty guy. They started off with one of these little kettle corn things, you know, like a little portable thingy that you can pull around from place to place. And he started off with sales of $16,000 in 2005. By 2008, he's making $50,000 a year in his popcorn business. He goes to festivals and county fairs, and he has 5 part-time employees. And what these employees do is that Joe calls the shots. So one day Joe might gravitate towards the popcorn, and so he'll be a bagger that day. And another day he, might gravitate over towards the drink, so he'll be the drink seller that day. So Joe, they use his body language, right, to decide what Joe's job's going to be, because Joe's the boss. These guys work for Joe, 5 employees that they've been able to hire. So basically, what have they done? Let's cut to the chase. They've developed, a supported daytime option for their adult son, right? They've got staffing that's paid for through the profits of the sales of the popcorn. It's a very respectable thing. You meet Joe, and it's like, well, he owns his own business. And, no way, really? Oh, yeah, he's making $50,000. And it makes the community look at Joe differently than it would if he was in a more typical congregate adult day program setting. So I just love Poppin Joe's Kettle Corn. I think it's kind of like, I hold it up there as a standard. We just opened, we were seeing a huge problem because one of the things I do is I run a school for kids with very severe autism and behavioral disorders, right? These kids all have one-to-one staffing support. They have always had it. And so every kid has their own aide, and then we have certified teachers and a bunch of other support staff. But the problem I was seeing was when they turned 22, if we weren't able to get rid of that aide, which was partly because the parents didn't want us to. So think about this one. If your child has a one-to-one, start weaning them away from that one-to-one so that they don't turn 22 and fall off the edge of the cliff when you can no longer get your hands on one-to-one for them, and they're at a huge disadvantage. But these kids were graduating and unable to go into the typical 1 to 3 adult day program setting that was an option for them where I live, right? That's the best you can get is 1 staff for 3 adults. And they can't function without a one-to-one. So they were sitting at home. They were making the rounds, getting kicked out of multiple programs. They'd last a couple months, get kicked out, go to another one, get kicked out. And so I went to our regional center and I said, this is unacceptable. You need some sort of a bridge program, right? An option between the one-to-one public school intensive services with the OTs and the speech therapists and the adult world with 1 to 3 and the staff have a high school diploma and really no other training and very little experience. So we started a model called the COW program, Choices for Adult Learning, and we used that, and these guys, again, very, very significant disabilities. These are not people that you can just say, go do it, and they do it for more than about 2 or 3 minutes. But we did this Microenterprise thing. And we had no idea how it was going to work, because don't forget about the aggression component. And so we went around in our local little business community, and one of the guys, we did a snack cart thing for him, all right? And his name's Dave. And Dave doesn't really speak, but Dave thinks he speaks. So Dave, I don't know, like that. But there's no intelligible language, although he persists. So we took him around to these businesses in our local area, and he started selling snacks. And they're little businesses like surfboard shops and places like that. And at first it was kind of like, oh, no thank you, but we kept going. And so my story here on this one is that, and that Dave can be a challenge to like. Can I just say that? I mean, not everybody is wonderful right off the top, and Dave is just one of these guys that's a real challenge to like for a number of reasons. He's out sick one day, and they had another person take over his snack cart so that Dave wouldn't lose any money. So the staff and the other person, because this model allows everybody to have a third of their day, that one-to-one support, right? It's one staff for 2 adults is the model. And so they go around with Dave's snack cart, and they get to the shop, and the guy in the front goes, Dave, hey you guys, he calls in the back, Dave's here. And these guys all come up from the back of the shop to buy their snacks from Dave, and they see it's not Dave, and they said, sorry, we only buy from Dave. And so they wouldn't buy their snacks from the other man, who also had significant, autism. And I just thought that was the greatest story, right? Because we were so shooting in the dark. We have a lady who has an attention span of maybe 30 seconds. Screams almost constantly. The only thing she really liked was water. We were able to get her a job with a catering company, putting her hands in the soapy water, maybe getting through half a dish. But it didn't really matter. She was happy, and it was a respectable microenterprise for her, and she gets paid. All of these guys get paid for the work that they do. So don't think that microenterprise can't be done just because people don't, have a lot of skills. I always have to throw this out because I told you about my son at the start of my talk. My son can't hold anything in his hands. He doesn't have consistent grasp, right? And so if my son was to work, and I've watched this model at another adult program, they took 3 adults into this church where they had a job wiping down the pews. That was their job. I think it was a volunteer job. It was another agency. And so the way they did it was they'd put somebody very capable, somebody sort of in the middle skills-wise, and then somebody very severely disabled, and they'd group them up. What do they call those? Heterogeneous groupings is the official term. And they get into the church and they take the guy with significant disabilities and they take a rag and they put it in his hand and they kind of put their hand over the top and they go 1, 2, 3 across the back of the pier. Good job, okay? And that guy's done. This was a 1-hour observation, and the guy with very significant disabilities made 3 swipes with the rag, and that was the end of his work experience. And all the rest of the work that was done in the following hour was pretty much done by the guy that was more capable. And the guys that were less capable, they just hung out. So in my world, I don't want my son to work. I think that's silly. I would much rather that he spend his time doing things that he enjoys and that give him a chance to be social, because that's my son's strength. So I guess I just always have to throw out there, having a job doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a happy life. Sometimes it's just silly. And so don't feel so terribly compelled that every kid has to have a job, because I don't happen to think that that's true. And I also think there's a lot of dignity in volunteerism. Now we're on life in the community. And here's things to think about when you're thinking about the community. I mean, people, have a right to all these things. Bodies that you can't touch without being asked. And most of the time, people are so kind. My son's in a wheelchair, right? And I remember us being at a like the wild animal park, kind of a zoo type of a place. And this lady comes swooping in on him. Oh, are you cute? And she's about this far from his face. And he's like, he's pushing back on the tray of the wheelchair and his head's going over here to the left. And she's so lovely and she's trying to be so nice. But the reality was she's patting him on the head and she's touching his arms. And you don't have any way to say, don't touch me, So these are things that you need to think about, right? How can you try to ensure this stuff for your child when they're out there in the community and you're not out there with them? Space that can't be invaded, personal possessions that people can't take, relationships that are safe and consistent. So what do we know? What does research tell us about life in the community? That you can get people without disabilities who are willing to explore friendships. And this is more peers that this is directed at. So if your child's 22, you can probably get some other 22-year-olds. The problem is they don't persist well, right? You get fits and starts. People might come in, they might stay connected, then they move on, right? They get married or they find another job or something goes on. And so this in and out in people's lives is huge for adults with autism. There's also kind of like if you talk to people with special needs about their friendships, oh, I've got lots of friends, But when you investigate them, it's not really our definition of friendship. It's more acquaintances. So you can't always rely on people to define for you what friends are. It's kind of overestimated what they call facades of friendship. So many people have no freely given and chosen relationships outside of their families. I certainly know my son doesn't, okay, and I'm in the field. But everybody that's really involved in his life is through me, right? It's my friends or my family, and my family doesn't live where we live, so they're a ways away. The research says that the reason why this happens, why our friends are more all about families, is because they're not given enough opportunity. We shelter them too much. We don't take them out there and put them out there or invite other people into their lives and persist enough. There's not enough support to keep those relationships going because it takes a lot of support to keep them going. And then there's a lack of continuity. And then increased social inclusion that is the result of community living does not equate to the development of friendship. And this is probably one of my biggest things. We've had homes in the community for 30 years. 30 years. We are all over our community. We're everywhere. We're in grocery stores. We're in banks. We're walking down the street. We're everywhere. But this has not resulted in relationships for the people that we support, consistent relationships within the non-disabled community, right? And that's our fault. I think it's our fault because we haven't targeted establishing a relationship as a goal. We just figured it would happen naturally, and it didn't. So it's great to be in the community, but we're not done yet because we're not part of the community yet. That's the part that we're missing out on. I love Wolfensberger. He just passed away. If you don't know about Wolfensberger, you absolutely have to promise me that you'll go read about his stuff. But his basic idea is that we have to find socially valued roles that we can put people with significant disabilities into, and that they can become valued by virtue of being in a valued role. Does that make sense to you? So if you met someone and you said, this is John and he's a garbage collector, and this is Sam and he's a biochemist, who do you think the community is going to kind of like be more drawn to it and be more respectful of and think, ooh, about? It's going to be the biochemist. It's the way our society works. Even though the garbage collector may be earning more than the biochemist is, we have this deal in our society. And so the idea is when you're looking up at what can I have my child do when they become an adult? How are they going to spend their time? Try to look up and pick those roles that society places value in. Being a member of a church community is a valued thing, okay? It doesn't have to be biochemistry. Being an employer, like Poppin Joe's. He employs 5 people. Here's Joe. He's an employer. It might make people, it will show them some connection they can relate to, right? Other than here's a guy who doesn't talk, who rocks back and forth and looks strange, and I can't connect with this guy, so I'm not going to try. Or he owns his own business. He made $50,000 last year. No way. It can be a way to connect people by looking at this idea of having socially valued roles. Obviously, the stories that we share have got to be stories of capability and not stories of disability. This is Joe. He's nonverbal is not the way that you want to introduce anyone. I don't think any of us would do that. Here's 3 things that are going on in the area of facilitating friendships. One's called bridge building, and these are actually organizations that get together. They hire facilitators, and those facilitators' jobs are to simply go out there and create relationships for people and help maintain those. And I'll talk to you in just a second a little bit more about that and how you can maybe get that going in your area if you don't have something like that out there. Circles of support, number one thing. If you're a parent, most of you are, start right this minute. Do either a formal or an informal circle of support. You've got to do it because when your kid's 50, you've got to have people in their life that are not paid to be there. And that's about you getting that started and getting that going and pulled together. And then some towns have actually created a position called a citizen advocate. And I would check into your town, especially if you're at all involved in your town. And they recruit and support people, almost like being a court-appointed special advocate. But this is more for welcoming people and including people into communities, this idea of citizen advocacy. So life quality is what it's all about, right? I mean, we just want our kids to be happy, or we just want our students to be happy, or whatever our role is. It's all about happiness. And there was a quality of life project, a really big one that was done. And this is how it was defined. It's based on common aspects of life for everybody. So we all have certain things we share in common that we say make our lives happy. But it also is a little bit different from one guy to the next. Your happy life is not exactly mine. And it's closely tied to the environments that we're in, right? So that's another important part of it. But really it's defined as how happy are you with your life at any given point in time. That's kind of what quality of life is. The research tells us those with developmental disabilities have a lower quality of life than the general population, so we have to fix that. I think that has to be our number one goal before we fix anything else, is to fix that. But there's also suggestion in the research that people with autism and other intellectual disabilities, with severe autism, they have something they can offer to the general community that nobody else can offer. And if we can parlay that and make people understand that, that's going to improve everybody's quality of life. I mean, come on, you guys all probably spend a lot of time with people with autism, and you can't put it into words, right? Because I can't, maybe you can, but there's just something there that you don't get anywhere else. And we need to find a way to get that out there to other people that are not, currently familiar with the population. here's what enhances quality of life. This is what the research says. If you can do all of these things, then quality of life will be promoted much more. Acknowledge preferences, teach choice, self-advocacy, if that's possible for someone to learn. This is the list. Communication, assertiveness, none of it is anything that you probably don't already know. The one I want to talk about, though, is human relationships and focusing on human relationships. And the first thing that you have to do, remember back to my study, my 4-year study, what do you want for your kid? I want him to be happy. What's that look like? Okay, so what we did was I found if I asked the right questions, parents could answer them. Well, do you want them to live in a group home? Well, maybe a little one. Okay, could they have a roommate? No, they couldn't have a roommate. Do they have to have their own television set? Absolutely, because they're going to watch their Disney movies every night. And so if you ask the right questions, parents could answer those. So what we did was we put together this survey. It takes 2.5 hours to go through this survey. By the time I was done writing it, I do it over the phone. I've done it with people all over the world. But it's called a life quality plan. And it's different than a futures plan. And it's different. It's not a financial plan. And it's not kind of this generic futures plan. This is a very specific life quality plan. What does your kid need in order to optimize, in order to be happy, as you know them now? Okay, and obviously these things are going to change over time, so you have to sort of update it. But we've been doing these life quality plans with families, and it seems to be working out pretty darn good. So the first thing that you've got to start with is defining what a happy life looks like. There's 13 life categories, okay, and we go through all 13 of these when we do it. You could certainly come up with your own. I'm not trying to get you to do ours, but just do something where you're putting down the life quality plan. I find with families, like when I did my will, they hand you this letter of intent thing. Have you guys gotten one of these? And say, here, fill it out. And you're looking at 800 pages that you're supposed to fill out, and it's like, I asked a lawyer, how often do you get these things back? She said, almost never. Almost never. We'll get answers to things. We'll put documents together, but it's very rare that we get families that fill out a letter of intent. And even then, it's just stuff like who's going to take care of them, where's their medication kept. But it doesn't get down to, like my son, for example, will not sleep at night unless you put an audio book on and you leave a light on in the room. And if you don't do that, that kid will be up at 4 o'clock in the morning, okay? This is important to know. I think it's a security thing. Don't know why. I just know that that's the reality. That kind of stuff doesn't end up in a letter of intent. It doesn't end up unless somebody says to you, are there special bedtime things that we ought to know about? What about foods? Are there foods that we shouldn't be dealing with? So I think it's just so critical to spell out what a happy life looks like. And that becomes the foundation for all of your goals. If your kids are still in school or you're working with school-age people, those are the goals you need to be working on. It's important to tie your shoe. It's important to toilet independently, okay? I'm not saying that stuff isn't important, but work on the stuff that really makes a big difference in quality of life. And figure out what that is ahead of time and base your goals on life quality planning. If you want to know more about it, there's our website. You can read a little bit more about the life categories that we have and stuff. It's $250 for parents. It's not really expensive, but it's our fundraiser for our agency because we're a nonprofit. We always have to raise funds. So spread the word. If you don't want to come up with something on your own, you might want to give our life quality plans a shot. We also put goals in them, suggested goals of stuff that emerges when we do it. So this idea of relationships, now we're back on how do you do this, right? How do you develop these circles of support? I went to my niece, right, when I was looking for my niece is in her 40s, when I was looking for somebody who's going to take over my son when my husband and I die, and I said, will you do it? Because she's really our only relative that's kind of shown any little bit of, connection. Everybody's nice, but they're a little bit, they don't quite know what to make of him, right? So, hey, how's it going? And that's about all you get. But she showed a little bit more interest. So I said, will you be the one? Will you take over? And she looks at me, and there's this pause, and she goes, yes, but don't die. Which didn't fill me with a lot of optimism. So I'm like, okay, that's great. She'll do it. I better try not to die. But in the meantime, I've got to get a group together. I have a younger son who's 20 years old. He's actually out here with me now, and goes to college right now. And I hope that he turns out to be a guy who will take good care of his brother. But at the moment, I wouldn't lay my money on it. Okay, I love him. He's great. But he is not prepared to take on the care of someone with profound and multiple disabilities like his older brother. So I had done this life quality plan with this family. It was in the early days of doing it. I've been doing them for about 2.5 years now. And when we were done, they said, I want that, and I want that, and I want that. I want those 3 things. Let's start doing those right now. And I said, well, let me find somebody that could maybe help you work on these goals. So I go looking for a life coach. Now, I know it's California, okay, and I know, but there's a lot of life coaches out there all over the place. And I thought, I'll go find a special needs life coach, right, that can help these families get this goal going. And I looked everywhere, and there was no such thing as a special needs life coach. Are you shocked? I was shocked. I mean, there's life coaches that will help you, meet the right guy, and there's life coaches that will help you, lose weight, and they'll help you do everything. But no life coaches to help families whose kids had special needs. I was appalled. So what I did, because education is my background, is I designed a training program for people who have experience in the field to become special needs life quality coaches, right? And so I've been doing this. It was a pilot, and I'm just over 3 years of training people to be special needs life quality coaches. And I had no idea what was going to happen with this when I did it. I thought, I could train these people and nobody will want them. The parents won't want to use them and they won't have a job. Because I'm training them to go into private practice, right? To hang out their shingle and say, hey, I'm a special needs life quality coach. I had no idea who would want to do this, who would want to take this class. So it's been an interesting learning experience for me, and I will share with you the deal. So here's the deal. It's a 16-week online class that I teach. You do it on your own time because everybody's busy these days, and including me. So I will post an assignment. The assignment has things you have to do wherever you live. And I've had people in Pennsylvania and Florida and all over the place. I've got a lady in South Africa right now taking it. And so we designed it so that it can be done where you live, because where you live is different than where the next guy lives. I couldn't possibly design a class that provides everything in Atlanta, Georgia. I can't do that. So you're sent out into your local community with various assignments, and then you post them, and your cohort and you all talk to each other and share ideas, and this moves along. So the first third of the class is really about when are those times that families are most likely to need a coach. Those early days when you're getting the diagnosis. It took a year and a half before we had all the diagnoses in on our son. Then there's that going into public school thing, and oh my gosh, what's this all about, and the IEP deal and all that. Then there's puberty, and middle school and high school, and oh dear. And then there's adulthood, and then there's that time when you can no longer, you're getting older, you're getting sicker, and you're going to have to pass the reins over. And those are the likely times when parents would hire a coach, right? So we talk about those times, and we talk about resources and options during those times. The middle of the class is about how do you coach? You got to be careful when families have special needs. I remember them offering me a support group in those early days. We have a great support group you should go down and join. And I'm thinking to myself, support group goes 2 ways. They might support me, but then I also have to support them. And sorry, I'm not in the mood to support anybody right now. I'm doing all I can. Every time we go to a doctor, we get another diagnosis. So I'm not ready for support groups. You guys know what I'm saying, since most of you are parents. You have to be careful with parents of kids with special needs. And so we talk about that. And the last third of the class is how do you start your own business and market yourself? How do you let people know you're out there? Now, most of the folks that are taking my class have a background, and they already know people. So who's been taking my class? Because that was another interesting thing. A third of them are parents, right? Parents who have negotiated the waters. They're a little bit older now, and they want to get out there, and they want to help other parents. About a third of them are special educators, okay? Now, I thought I would get a lot of direct support workers. I've had almost no direct support workers take the class, which is very interesting to me. And then you know who the other third are? It's like attorneys, physicians. I had a physician call me and go, I don't like being a medical doctor, but I love working with families, so I think a coach would be a really great job for me. And she wants to start, hire a bunch of people to work under her, right, and go out and do coaching. So people in what I would call related professions, case managers, financial planners, people like that, and siblings. I've probably had about a dozen siblings that have taken the course too. So that's who's been taking the class. So what are parents hiring them to do? How'd it go? When I sent my first group out, I'm like, oh my gosh, nobody's going to hire them, and I'm going to feel really terrible, And you know what parents are hiring them for? Guess. Somebody guess. What do you think parents are hiring coaches for? Friendships. 80% of them are getting hired for friendships. Friendship development, that's mostly what it is. So one of my examples was a mother, her son was 38 years old. And he was a more capable guy. He had a dual diagnosis. He had autism and he had some mental health disorders. And he wanted to make friends. That's what he wanted. He was isolated, living at home with his mother. He was going to strip clubs, but he wasn't making any friends, and he didn't get it. So she called up a coach and she said, my son needs some friends. Can you help him do something with this, right? So the coach took the guy out and they joined a fitness center and they went to a couple of other places. And the coach ended up working with him about a year. So most of these coaches are it's a shorter term deal for most of these coaches. Another one was a man who actually extremely bright. He had Asperger's, got his high school diploma, totally got stuck. Graduated from high school, sat on the video games all day long, wouldn't get his driver's license, wouldn't leave the house. His mom was going nuts. So she hired a coach right about his age, early 20s, who went with him to the community college. They enrolled in a class. This guy liked history a lot. So they enrolled in a history class. The coach stayed with him in that class until he didn't need it anymore. They joined the Sierra Club because, again, this young man liked environmental conservation business. And so this coach facilitated, right? He kind of got him unstuck. And he worked a little less than a year. And now this young man just took his own vacation. He's a full-time student. So he was a great success story. But that's where, and I didn't know where parents would be using these coaches, but that's where. Is in that area. One of my fondest wishes, I have many, but I'll just tell you two in closing here. I would like life coaches everywhere. Special needs life coaches. If you know anybody that wants to be one, have them contact us. I get calls now that I'm doing it. I live in, whatever, Wisconsin. Do you have a coach here? And I have to say, our closest coach is Pennsylvania. Because they're all spread out. I've only been doing it for a couple of years. It's not real widely known. But I think it's an answer. It's a source of support that we don't have right now that's very specific to what we want to make a quality life. And you can't get it through case management, and you can't get it any other way. My biggest wish for coaches is that they'll do circle of support development, that they'll be the guys that reach out to my niece, not me, okay, that they have to hear her go, well, maybe, but don't die, and that they will bring this group together, and that in my will, I will leave my life insurance money, a part of it, to this coach that hopefully I have a long relationship with, and they'll keep that circle of support going. They'll be the glue. And make sure that people get replaced when they leave, and that they'll do the work of that rather than me doing the work of that. And because it's hard. It's hard to reach out to your friends. I know they love me. I love them. But to ask them to play a long-term role in my kid's life, it's really hard. I'm afraid they'll say yes and not really want to say yes. You know what I'm saying? So I am very hopeful that every single one of us who are parents have a formal or informal circle of support going for our kids. And that we have coaches who can facilitate that after we're gone. So this is one of my dreams for the future. So in closing, one of the things I really want to do, if you guys are interested, I went on to LinkedIn. You know what LinkedIn is? I'm not real techie, but I went on to LinkedIn right before this conference, and I started a group called Autism and Quality of Life. And what I'd like to do is continue this discussion about models. Right? What's going on in your area? What have you heard about that sounds good? Do you know of somebody that's doing X or Y? And just kind of through that LinkedIn, try to keep the conversation going about new models. I participate with Steve Adelson from ARI. He does a monthly phone call thing where people call in from all over the U.S. with new models of support for adults. And what's going and how's it working. And so I'm going to feed information from that group into this LinkedIn thing. And I spend my life on the internet because, I want my kid to be happy, right? So I'm looking around, always looking around. And so if you'd like to join us, when you get back, just go on to LinkedIn and put Autism Quality of Life, or write your name down on your email down here, and I'll send you one of those invite things and ask you to join us. But I go around and talk a lot, and I'd like to get a big group of people who want to have this discussion about what new models do we need to get going, and how might we be able to get them going. I do have connections with a lot of people in the autism community, and I can drag them into these discussions. If you've got ideas, or you see this hole but you don't know how to fill it, let's start talking about that. My last thing to say is, it will not matter that your kid has autism as an adult, period. It won't. It matters now. I know it matters now. But when they're 50 years old, nobody's going to even open up their file and see autism. And if they do see autism, it isn't going to matter. Because all they're going to do is deal with the person they have. And their diagnosis doesn't matter. They're going to look at John and here's John, and here's what John needs, and here's what John does. And so we have to get away from the disability-specific stuff that we're spending all of our time doing and start dedicating ourselves to quality of life. Because it doesn't matter what our kids' special needs are. We want them to be happy, right? So instead of devoting all of our time to a disability, and I am not saying, so don't send me nasty letters. Yes, we need to figure out what the deal is with autism. Yes, we need to figure out, we have a lot of work to do specific to autism, but we have done no work specific to quality of life, where we set that aside, whether, my kid's got CP and profound disabilities, your kid's got autism, somebody else's kid has Williams syndrome. Let's put that aside and let's say, as parents whose kids are atypical and need a different structure and need a different support across their lifespan, let's have that discussion. Let's start focusing on that. So that's really my big message for today. And I am, again, very appreciative of you guys being here at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon when you could be at Universal Studios in the rain, like I was yesterday. We walked through puddles beyond my ankle yesterday in these plastic baggies. I was telling this lady back here, because we paid and we were going to Harry Potter World, okay? And they closed Harry Potter World down. Anyway, that's another story. Do you guys have any questions or anything? I thank you for your attention. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Neat. Okay.
Just saying that don't get to move out of Florida because they were giving Massachusetts. I came down this first because she's an adult. She was in a school and Massachusetts is great. We came to Florida, they found us, it's great, we got here. So don't get to move out.
Well,
few things in Florida.
Well, states with individualized funding, because I wish we were one. In California, we are not yet. We're supposed to be soon. I think they're going to be able to use that individualized funding. But if you can get a coach with it, and that coach can get you going on things. I know. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because they listen. And I think that parents, I'm not a parent, but I am like a parent, that is starting the parents. Every person that I've met so far, severe autistic, not severe, non-verbal, or no other disabilities or abilities, they always have something to say.
Yep.
And it's up to us trying to understand their language instead of just sitting down and wait for the behavioral analyst to find a way so they can understand. Here, she types to communicate. She goes everywhere. She writes letters to the newspaper. She met the editor. She has a great relationship with him. You supported her letters every month in our local newspaper.
That's great. That's great. Good for you.
And we go everywhere, and the people who really understand her, we foster that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's in the stories we tell, right? Right.
Foster that. So she always going to the people who understand and like her, who are neurotypical people, and they sit down and talk. And I'm just there. I don't care.
Right.
It's her thing.
Well, Amy's able to share who she is with people, right? Through her typing. But
It's a long time.
It does take a long time.
People still do not.
Don't get it. That's true. But it's about the stories we tell, right? It's about the stories we tell. We have to tell stories that bridge that gap. We have to show the humanity of people, the person behind the disability, right? They're there, and it's hard for other people to see, and other people tend to go, and so it's about the stories that we tell. So,
when you foster those relationships with people who are neurotypical, they become advocates for that person.
They can, absolutely. Once you
Once
break through, right.
She wanted to go to the Colbert Report and the Daily Show.
Yeah.
They are supporters of disabilities and autism in particular. And she got a chance to talk to them, to ask them questions. So she went to she asked the questions through her computer.
Right.
And then they start answering to me, and I said, she asked you.
Right.
So this kind of advocacy also helps them.
It does. It's an excellent point.
Self-advocacy, many times it's just showing up.
Right.
Because it just shows up, and people remember her.
That's right, familiarity. Let me see if anybody else has questions or anything that they want to say. I'm sorry to cut you off, but did anybody else want to add anything? Any other questions? Okay. Well, I hope you join me on LinkedIn, and thank you again.